Welcome to freedomlovin.com, where we focus on building freedom in an unfree world. Through personal development, location independence, and passive income strategies. Now here's your host, Kevin Koskela.
Welcome to Freedom Lovin'. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 88. Thanks for joining us today. In just a minute, I have an interview coming up with Stephen Nash. And Stephen is someone that I actually just met a few weeks ago at an event here in San Diego. And after doing just a little bit of research, I remembered that I used to listen to his podcast back in 2009. And he had a podcast on dating for men. And so I got a lot out of it back then. And then I remember back then noticing that it just ended and there wasn't any more episodes. And I was kind of bummed because it was one of the only dating podcasts that I listened to, or one of the only people that I listened to in that kind of realm. So it was pretty cool to actually meet him in person and then now get him on the podcast. And he was also one of the characters in the book The Game by Neil Strauss back in 2005. So that is coming up in just a second. And I really liked the interview. I thought that there's a lot that you can learn from Stephen, no matter what stage of life you're in. So stay tuned for that. And I have a iTunes review. I want to read that out, and that is from Music Wiz 8. How to create the freedom you deserve. 5 stars. Kevin brings great guests on his shows. Coupled with his wise insights, Kevin's podcast can help you to create the freedom you want. Most podcasts do not give practical advice, which you can actually apply. Kevin's podcast gives us applicable advice. Don't miss out on a great podcast. Well, thanks so much for that review. I really appreciate that. That really helps to keep the show alive and kicking. So if you're listening to the show and you have anything that you want to add, please go to iTunes and give us a review. It'd be awesome, and I'll read it on the next show. So a couple other things I want to mention before we get to the interview. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get some blood drawn. I'm doing testing on kind of all the factors that go into health. The reason I decided to do this was a couple of things. Well, one is I've been having this chronic shoulder pain, and it's been going on for really almost about 2 years. I mean, it started out not too bad. Now it's gotten to the point where I've lost some mobility in my shoulders, and I've tried so many different things. I've tried massage. I've tried chiropractors all over the place. I've tried physical therapy, and nothing has really made it improve. So I was listening to this podcast last week. It's called Smart Drug Smarts, which I mentioned on the last show. And there was one show that he had a naturopathic doctor on. And I was really impressed with her knowledge and what she had to say. And she has a program actually that you can basically get your blood taken and then send her the results. And then she does a full-on review of what is going on and what you may need to do, like as far as nutrition goes, or what, your lifestyle, or things that you may be missing. So I'm really interested to find out about that. I'm going to report back. It's probably going to be a couple weeks before I have any real results because it's December and everybody's busy, and I'm not sure if she has an appointment available in the next 2 weeks, but we shall see. And I'm really interested to find out if there's anything going on that can affect something like shoulder pain, shoulder mobility. So we'll find out, and I will report back, and I will also give you her name. I can't say anything yet because I haven't even talked to her. We've exchanged some emails, but I can't necessarily recommend her, but I'll just give her out her info. Her name is Dr. Alexis Shields. She's a naturopathic doctor, and her website is dralexisshields.com, and that's dralexisshields.com. And so if you want to check that out, there's a lot of cool stuff on there, and you can kind of see what she's all about. I will have more to say on this probably, like I said, in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. And also I want to mention that I did a sale on my website. So I'm doing this course called Burn Fat for Life. I had back in early October, I started the program, which was kind of a reverse your New Year's resolution. So it's a 10-week program that I ran live with the 22 Social app, and it's all done on Facebook. And so I got 13 people that joined back in October, and they all paid $297. And every week we meet And it's not really a meeting. It's more of like a webinar, but I do it on 22 Social's live hangouts on Facebook. So people in the course will sign in and they can watch my presentation. And then there's a PDF file that they get each week that has information on it about the weeks what we're talking about that week, and then usually a challenge or some sort of an assignment. So that's been going well. We have a few people that are having some success with that. And now I opened it up again. I was going to do like a Black Friday sale, but then I got so busy with so many other things and it just didn't happen. And I ended up doing just a 1-day sale on Monday. So sort of like a Cyber Monday sale. And I discounted it all the way to $97 just for 1 day. And I got 11 people to join. So, and these are people that I'm not promising them a live experience. So they're just going to go through the course on their own. So I'm pretty excited about that because in January, I'm really going to blow this up and I'm going to have a lot of people join because I realized I can handle a lot more than, 15 people at a time. So I will be accepting probably up to about 50 people, maybe even more at that point. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I'm really excited about 22 Social. And I'm going to talk to them about being more of an affiliate for them. They have an affiliate program and I haven't really done anything with it, but that's something that is in the works. And I'd like to promote them more because I think this is kind of really ties into the freedom lifestyle that I like to talk about so much. The ability to just create a membership site really quickly like that, I think is just so awesome. And I think it's kind of one of those stumbling blocks. It gets in people's ways that they have ideas, they want to do things, but they're just kind of timid to get started with all the things they need to do, like build the website and get the membership site software and get the shopping cart set up and all that stuff that's really annoying. So this is something that, I really believe in 22 Social. I really like the experience there and how I've been able to create another income stream from it without too much work. It is work to create videos and to create a course and things like that. But the way I've done the course is each week I prepare that week's material. So it's sort of I'm slowly building the course. I didn't spend like a lot of time all at once building the entire course. So that's something that I'll keep talking about. I'll keep mentioning how that's going. And if you're interested, just let me know if you have any questions. If you are building any kind of a membership site, I'd love to chat with you and see what your ideas are. I think that it's something that really can be part of a freedom lifestyle. So anyway, that's all I had today. I wanted to get to the interview. So without further ado, here's my interview with Stephen Nash. Go out there and build some freedom, and we'll talk to you soon. All right. Well, I'm really excited to have Stephen Nash on the show today. Stephen Nash was introduced to the world as Playboy from the book The Game by Neil Strauss, which topped the New York bestsellers list and propelled a select group of pickup artists to global recognition. After leaving Project Hollywood in August of 2004 and kissing the game goodbye, Stephen continued to hone his skills into a more natural and holistic framework for attracting and dating women. The new coaching philosophy met with success in helping men of all backgrounds overcome their dating challenges and become capable of delivering lasting, healthy relationships with women. Stephen has worked with over 1,000 coaching clients in his career and is the author of the best-selling How to Get a Girlfriend, now in its 5th edition. He is also a contributing writer to the Good Men Project. And his website is lifestyle-arts.com. Stephen, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Thank you, Kevin. It's nice to hear somebody read through that because I'm usually the one reading it or reading it out loud. It's really cool to hear somebody read those words.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, it's funny because I mentioned this to you, but I actually was introduced to your podcast back in 2009, I think. Yeah. And I remember I was digging through a lot of the information from the W Your Dating stuff.
Right.
He had a lot of interviews, and I was listening to all these interviews that he did, and yours was one of them. And I was like, I like this guy. He's saying some really good stuff. And it was different from what a lot of the other dating coaches were saying and the pickup artist guys were saying. And I was like, I kind of resonate with this. So I started listening to your podcast, and then it just disappeared. And was like, I didn't know what happened.
Right.
And then I met you a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, there he is.
Yeah. Yeah, we changed the name. Well, first of all, I kind of stopped doing it for a while. We can get into that later if you want. But then about a year and a half ago, I picked it up again and have now really kind of pushed it forward. I think we're at about 50 episodes now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to see that back. So yeah. Let's get into it. What was your start in life like?
My parents divorced when I was young, and I came of age, I guess, in the mountains of North Carolina as a teenager. And in thinking about the content of your podcast and sort of like what I imagine we'll talk about, I felt very locked in and fearful. And I was good in school, but I was not good socially. I was not at all successful with women by any stretch. I had friends, I was social, but I felt very unexpressed in truth in my life. I got really good at golf, which is kind of a wild side note. I think I was good at golf because it wasn't a team sport and I could play it on my own. But really, I was, this kind of awkward, insecure, shy. I bloomed late, teenager, and I moved to New York in my early 20s. And New York did a lot of things to me, for me mostly. And it was through the kind of relative anonymity of New York City that I felt free to kind of be a little more myself. And that kind of launched my journey into kind of looking at dating and pickup and business and all these other things that I know we're going to get into.
That's awesome. I never thought of New York as being somewhere that you can kind of find yourself. I look at it as kind of this big, overwhelming city. And that's an interesting perspective that you kind of were able to come out of your shell there, right?
Yeah, I know. It surprised me too, because this town I grew up in, the mountains of North Carolina, is very small. But what I realized was everybody knows everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. My mom ran the local newspaper. We could have had like a little sitcom written about that newspaper, by the way, just the wild small town life that kind of flowed in and out of there. It was pretty interesting. But having this awareness that everybody knows everything about you kind of locked me in. Yeah. When I came to New York, I realized like none of these people know me. Not only do they not know me, they could give a shit about me. And I felt suddenly like, wow, I can kind of come out of the shell. And it was the perfect place for me to go at that time in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then what led you eventually to Project Hollywood? What is it first? I don't know if everybody knows about it.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Project Hollywood. So I got involved in pickup about the age of 30. And pickup is where you learn or you undertake this challenge, this task, this action of going out and learning how to approach and meet women successfully. And typically pickup, at least in its most extreme case, is a lot about getting laid and kind of having sex and all that. I struggled with women. Obviously, in my teens, it was just like it was a no-go because I was completely insecure and just really shy. And then in my 20s, I did meet some women. I had some dating success, and I found myself in these relationships. But as far as like the freedom to really be an equal partner in something and choose a woman who chose me, which I think is a powerful freedom that I help men find now, kind of freeing themselves up from whatever limiting beliefs or fears, kind of old ideas that are shutting that down, helping to clear that out so that a guy can really come forward as himself, meet the kind of women he wants, and fall into a relationship of his choosing. Mm-hmm. Instead of that, I fell into relationships where women who liked me, I would just naturally like back because I had so few options. Mm-hmm. So a kind of an experiment about where these 5 top pickup artists, it was myself, Neil Strauss, I'll refer to them by their pickup monikers, which not Stephen Nash, but my pickup moniker was Playboy. Neil Strauss was Style. Eric von Markovic was Mystery. Nick Coe was Papa, and Tynan, who actually I can't really remember his last name. He just goes by Tynan now, was Herbal. So the 5 of us were the actual rent-paying members of Project Hollywood. So we kind of came together for a very intense half a year, 3/4 of a year, and experimented with everything you can possibly imagine in terms of social experiments and pickup, and had some pretty wild times. So my interest in pickup was really a reaction to a lack of freedom and a lack of power I felt with women in dating. And like many kind of post-adolescent males, I overreacted and became one of these kind of top pickup artists, which didn't actually lead me closer to my real goal of having a lasting, healthy, kind of vibrant relationship. But it was fun at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, the original design of Project Hollywood, actually, which is not really known to many people who have read The Game. The Game is the book that chronicles what happened at Project Hollywood. That was written by Neil Strauss. But the original intent of Project Hollywood was not for it to be a pickup mecca. And at its height, the five of us were living there. All the top pickup artists in the world rotated through that house, and we would all go out together and pick up girls in these huge raucous clubs on Sunset Boulevard. And the idea, was to pull them back to the house. I mean, I say that word, it's so tacky to even use that phrase, but that's what we called it at the time. And so that's what it became. The original intent of it, though, was not really for it to become a pickup artist mecca, but it was really for it to be a lifestyle experiment.
Right.
So I also had these skills in event management. Neil had access to celebrities or celebrities. Mystery Eric was actually a magician, and he could be this kind of influence on the space. He could also kind of be a celebrity in his own way and kind of dazzle people with his magic, which, let me tell you, was no joke. He was really good. The idea was to pool all of our collective talents, and so for this to become kind of a lifestyle experiment where pickup or being skilled socially with women was a flavor to it, but not the overall meaning of it. We lost our way, needless to say, and the whole thing kind of imploded on itself because we had two competing businesses in there, and it just became insane. I eventually just picked up and moved back to New York because I knew I was really becoming a shadow of who I was, and I had really gone too far with all this, and I needed to rein it in.
How long were you in the house?
I was there for almost 7 months, and it was, every day was felt like, a good solid week of my previous life. There were so many experiences.
Yeah, that's amazing. And now, do you have any stories that stand out? I know there's a lot, but anything that stands out as that was a really great time?
Well, the thing that always jumps out at me, I guess there are two sides of that question. The really insane stuff, we had Courtney Love live with us for a couple of months. Neil had just done a cover story on her for Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
And she had just been she had had something happen at a concert. She had thrown a mic stand at somebody or something. I mean, she had acted out. She was on drugs at the time. And she was literally homeless.
Yeah.
And she asked Neil. Neil was telling her about the house and what we were doing. And she asked Neil if she could stay with us. And he texted all of us. And I was out with my buddy Mike. And I was like, holy shit, look at this. I showed him the text. And so everybody responded and said, hell yeah, why not? I mean, at that point, we were a few months into this, and the thing had already kind of just blown up. Why not?
Yeah.
And so I showed up at the house. I'm not kidding you. I don't know, a couple of hours after that text. And Neil had texted us all to say, all right, she's moving in right now. I walked into the house with Mike, and there Courtney was sitting on, there was this little kind of internal staircase that kind of led you from a dining area down to the living area. She was naked, smoking a cigarette. None of us were smokers. She was completely naked and smoking a cigarette and holding forth with about 8 people around, including Neil. And this is 2 months of our lives, completely chaotic, unpredictable behavior from Courtney, largely drug-induced.
Yeah.
I can remember one night she woke me up in the middle of the night screaming at me for porn. She was convinced that I had porn. I have never been into porn. It's never been a thing for me. She said, I know you've got porn. You're a 30-year-old man. I said, I don't have any porn. She started tearing open my drawers of my dresser and throwing my clothes around.
Wow.
It was insane. So there was that side of it. There was some serious mayhem. But then the other side of it was forming some pretty incredible relationships with people and being around people who, even though at that time we were all, let's say, involved in a very extreme experiment, but some of these people have really done some remarkable things. Neil is obviously a great writer. I helped edit I was one of the initial editors of this book on Jenna Jameson, which was, I couldn't put it down. It was so good.
Yeah.
Tynan is, talk about freedom. He's somebody you should also talk to, but he's like a digital nomad. He lives in an RV by choice. He travels at a whim. He goes all kinds of places. And he has enduring relationships from that time are some things that I really cherish, though at the time it was pretty wild.
Yeah, and when you say enduring relationships, do you mean with the other guys, or are there women that were you had deep connections with there?
With the guys. So the worst kept secret was that whole thing didn't really work for attracting women for long-term relationships.
Right.
No doubt about it. None of the women that I'm connected with, one of the women that I knew at that time, And that's very distantly through Facebook and,
Right.
we wish each other happy birthday. So there's no real connection there.
Yeah.
The guys, though, because we went through this together, that endured. But interestingly enough, Project Hollywood and really Pickup, as I've come to see, don't really serve long-term relationships. That kind of behavior often becomes very mechanical and inauthentic. And, what I was looking for, and I think what many men who are really healthy and just maybe lack some skill are looking for are tools that will help me more freely express myself, be more freely myself, the more empowered version of that, so that I can have really healthy, lasting relationships. And the other takeaway from the whole time are just some pretty wild stories. I mean, my wife, it's so funny. We've just moved to California, so we're meeting a lot of new people, and we'll go out to dinner, say with a couple, and they'll say, "So what do you do?" to me, And this is, let me tell you, at any dinner table, I know the next 20 minutes of conversation are set because whenever I say, "Well, I'm a dating coach for men," that gets both a man and a woman's attention for very different reasons.
Right.
And then inevitably, the question comes up, the good question of how are you qualified for that? And I'll kind of walk them through my process.
Okay. That's great. Do you think the book has helped men in some ways?
I do. I think Neil does not romanticize it in any way. I mean, he shows it for what it really was, at least Project Hollywood, that is. But I do think many men, a big first thing that most men need to know is that your inability with women in dating, your lack of success, is not due to some kind of huge moral decision about you. It's not that you're a bad person or that you've been determined to be unattractive by the female race or whatever kind of crazy decision you might have come to, but that there is a skill set that you can adopt and learn and become more successful with women in dating. Mm-hmm. So thinking about freedom, there's a big freedom contained in that, okay, I can become more attractive, I can become more social, I can learn skills for interacting with women. What a revelation. What a great thing that is. Now, Pickup itself as a lifestyle and as a movement is not really that healthy, at least in my experience. I think, though, within that, there are certain skills and certain takeaways that are invaluable, for sure.
Yeah, so you kind of talked about how Pickup or, the things you were doing in the game didn't really help you get to a relationship that you were looking for. What are the downsides? Like, what's the problem with learning all that and going through an experience like that?
Well, so what you find is the men who are drawn to Pickup, typically, I won't say 100% of the time because nothing's 100%, but usually they come in there with low self-esteem, a real lack of experience, whether that's just in interaction or dating or sexual or relationship. There's just a huge void in their life when it comes to women, a huge lack of experience. So the psychology of the guy who shows up, the doorstep of Pickup, tends to be one who is lacking experience and really needing a lot of help internally. And what Pickup offers is a lot of external kind of tools and gimmicks, but it doesn't address the real issues that are going on inside of him. What it does is kind of, for lack of a better phrase, lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to dress this thing up and make it look a certain way so that a certain result is attained. What I found is that result is very short-lived, and the real issue is never really addressed. And the real issue tends to be, at least in the vernacular of Pickup, is what we call seeking validation. So you've got a guy here with low self-esteem, oftentimes no self-esteem, and very little experience with women. Suddenly you give him 8 to 10 different things to say, and he's out there meeting women, and he starts doing it a lot on his own because it can be very addictive. A few things occur. One is that his social behavior becomes very robotic and mechanical, which is antithetical to having any kind of real connection with somebody.
Right.
So you've got to equip him with the ability to transition away from all these scripts and into using himself, talking about himself, empowered with real skill and not gimmicks or techniques.
Right.
But the other thing that is lacking is addressing the inner stuff, the inner kind of climate that created this void in his life in the first place. people who show up to the pickup world tend to have some sort of lack in that area. So you've got to deal with that lack. You've got to address that. For me, the way it looked was I'd be in front of women and I'd be talking and showing off and doing my thing, but deep down, I needed their approval desperately.
Right.
And being a coach, being a pickup coach, I don't do pickup anymore, obviously, or maybe that's not obvious, but I don't do that anymore. I haven't done that in a while. But when you're out there being paid a lot of money to pick up girls, you not only need them, first of all, you need them to be attracted to you financially. Like, okay, I've got to pull this off. I've got 6 guys standing around me watching me do this to this woman in this club or bar or street or cafe. I've got to be successful. But underneath that is a real need, a real gaping wound, let's call it, for me. I needed their validation. I needed her approval to somehow stamp me with approval to the outside world.
Right.
I had to step away from all of this whole masquerade, this whole circus, and kind of deal with that. And this happened maybe 10, 11 years ago. When I left LA, I knew I needed to deal with that. I needed to get closer to that and understand what this was in me that so desperately needed a woman's approval. Her endorsement of me was so necessary. And so I had to cut into that and deal with that. And then I suddenly was able to kind of layer that with real social skills, some lifestyle, social circle techniques to help me expand my social world. And suddenly I had an abundance of women in a very short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But I needed to deal with the primal thing first. I couldn't dress it up. It doesn't work.
Right. In your book, the How to Get a Girlfriend, you talk about this stuff?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, where I cover a lot about social skills, growing your social life, how to talk to women, all that stuff is in there. But the primal stuff is, okay, what's really going on with you? What is your relationship to women as a whole? What is lacking in you? And I bring forward certain commonalities or patterns that I've seen that many men struggle with. And I try to kind of address those so that a guy reading this book can maybe see himself in those words and feel, at least at first, what he should do. So I lead the book off with, and I call it your purpose, your mission, your aim. These are words I use largely interchangeably. But I think for men, we are called into great action and great vision for our lives by connecting to a great purpose or mission. And I think in our world today, this is not discussed. I was, and maybe many of your listeners are, we're kind of put into categories. I find myself in a job, I spin out of college, I've got debt, and I'm suddenly banging away at a computer for a decade or more of my life. And my life can lack a certain meaning. It can take on a repetitive, kind of brutal repetitive nature. And many of the men I work with find a real lack of meaning in their lives. So we have to connect back to what it is that makes us men, what makes us who we are, what that really is about biologically, and connect with that. What is something big that you can give your life to? That doesn't mean go walk into your boss's office tomorrow and say, I'm out of here, but it does mean a different approach to my life, but you have to start there. That's where the real work begins. And then from that, some great things can take place, but it won't be overnight and it won't be easy. But as my path has proven, and many guys that I've worked with has proven, the results are real. They're not lipstick on a pig.
It was one of your podcasts that you were talking about that some of the guys you work with from the beginning, they often are just trying to be like everybody else. And like the way they dress, the way their interests, like everything is just like, well, I'm just like every other guy. And then that's actually the opposite approach of what is actually going to attract women, right?
Right. I think there is a very generic, homogenous vibe. Men, for some reason or another, do tend to fall into certain routes or paths in life. And inevitably, when I work with a guy one-on-one, and I'll ask him to do a few things before he shows up. And one that just comes to mind because you brought it up was, I'll ask him, I want you to dress like you're going out tonight to a great party. It's going to be a fun time. It's your best friend's birthday party. You know there are going to be attractive women there. Dress like you're going to that party. So I put him in a mindset like he's going to show up, in his most attractive version of himself. And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, that guy shows up and he looks like every other guy who just showed up. They always look the same. And I think there is this kind of in the box world that most men live in. And my job, largely as a dating coach and really understanding attraction, is to pull guys out of that box and get them thinking much more bigger, more broadly, put some excitement into their life, and cause them to really ask themselves, well, who am I? What do I want? What do I want to wear, for example, to cut back to that earlier case? Right. What do I want to do? What do I want to spend my time doing? What would give my life meaning? And then map out a process for that to become more and more a dominant feature of his everyday life.
Totally. Now, going back to your life, so you got out of the Project Hollywood, you're living in New York, early 30s, and you're kind of pulling yourself together. And you said you were, at that point, you got to a point where you had basically an abundance of women. Anytime you wanted a date, you'd have a date, and you were meeting people that you felt connected with, as opposed to just like one night of sex and then move on to somebody else. So how do you go from that point where you've got women at your fingertips and women that you want to be with to a long-term committed relationship?
For me, it happened very naturally. In other words, I desired it. I really wanted that. The appearance of this kind of playboy bachelor lifestyle, what it looks like from the outside, to other people. And then there's the at least for me, the reality of that within. And so I think in thinking about freedom and women in dating, it starts with any guy or woman for that matter, like being really clear about what it is that they want. Like, where are you in your life? What do you want right now from this really crucial component to our lives? What is it that I'm looking for? And for a while, I felt like I needed to catch up. I was in my 30s. I was very bereft of sexual experience. I was very bereft of just interaction with feminine energy. I had just not had a lot of that. And so I went in all the way and got a vast amount of it in a short amount of time. In about a year and a quarter, I interacted with a lot of women, and I kind of filled that part of my life up. I kind of caught myself up, so to speak. I used to tell people, it was kind of like the frat years in college that I never had, compressed them into 6 months in Los Angeles. Okay, so apparently I needed to do that. Some guys don't need to do that. That's fine. You certainly don't have to, but I needed to do that. And when I came back to New York, I realized what I really wanted was a relationship. I wanted to connect with someone more deeply. I wanted to be received for myself as I really am. And I wanted to be with someone I was really attracted to, that I could feel a kind of emotional connection to on an ongoing basis. Because the thing that happens when you date a lot, and maybe you're kind of cultivating some relationships here, maybe you're not dating certain women after a date or two, one thing you realize is that you have real preferences. Mm-hmm. Like, I have real preferences and desires. And I got tired of just the serial nature of it. Like, there's a new woman in the chair and I feel a certain way about her or I don't. And what I really desired very naturally through this experience of dating and being with various women was I wanted a long-term relationship. I wanted that. And soon after I wanted it, because I was following a certain practice and a certain path, a relationship emerged. And then it lasted a certain period of time and then it ended. And so I needed those experiences now. I needed to experience relationships and more longer term things, because what happens in a long-term relationship is extremely different than what happens certainly in a pickup, but even in just like, kind of everyday dating scenarios where, you go out with a girl or a guy and, okay, I'll go out with her again. Then you go out with her again. You're like, okay, I'm just not that interested. Or maybe you go out with her 3 times or 6 times or whatever it is. But I really wanted something that could last longer. And that whole thing, relationships, are very different than those other 2 areas of just learning how to meet people and learning how to be better at dating. Relationships it's a whole other world that calls forth other types of challenges that I think naturally, biologically or spiritually maybe, for me, I made a transition away from wanting one to wanting the other because my own evolution and my own growth required that change, if that makes any sense.
Right. So this is the relationships. I agree. It's a whole nother ballgame. What happened with the one? I'm curious. What happened with the one that you broke up with? How did that all go down?
Oh, geez.
You want to tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I'm married now. I've been with my wife for a long time, for us. I mean, we're coming up on 6 years together. That's my current reality. But before her, after I left Project Hollywood, and maybe this was karma kind of kicking me in the ass a little bit, but shortly after well, not shortly after, but a couple of years after I came back, I did meet a woman through a job I had at the time. I used to do events and producing events and all kinds of things. I've done a lot of that over the years. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I met her through one of those, and we dated, fell in love, dated for a year. We moved in together, a beautiful loft out in Brooklyn, got a dog. I still have the dog, by the way, wonderful dog. But after being together for a while, it's funny, I didn't realize it was happening. So first of all, she was bipolar. I have no judgment about that. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. And she, for one reason or another, kind of allowed herself to be compromised with that. She wasn't taking her medication. She was working a job that, to most experts in bipolar disorder, was not a good job for her to have. She was working at a bar from, say, 9 o'clock at night until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn, which was, sometimes it would turn violent. I mean, it was kind of a crazy time. Anyway, I never knew when she was coming home, and it was wild. Anyway, so all this was happening, and I guess in the midst of all that, she was losing interest in the relationship. And so instead of kind of talking to me about it or asking for help or ending it naturally for herself, I went off actually to LA. I was speaking at a conference, a dating conference, and I stood on stage. And by the way, at this time we were engaged. And I think when we got engaged, which happened about 6 months prior to this time period I'm describing, I think when we got engaged, something in her flipped. I don't know what it was, a switch in her flipped. And she began to kind of pull away, and her disease, let's call it, really started to overwhelm her. And it could have been that the intimacy was being called forward into a new level, and she just wasn't willing to do it, or maybe she didn't want to do it. I have no idea. But nevertheless, I came back from that trip, and I'll just describe the scene because I think it says it all. I walked into our apartment. She wasn't there. She was working. And I walked in, and there were 2 wine glasses that had just a little bit of wine residue in the bottom that were right by the kitchen. Mm-hmm. There were wine stains on the couch and on the sofa. There were candles all throughout the bedroom with little matches next to each of these candles. So clearly there had been a little candle party in the bedroom. Yeah. And so I saw all of this, and it took me another 24 hours. I mean, this is how delusional I was, or just how unaware of what was really happening I was. But finally, I realized, like, holy shit, I think she had a guy over. Yeah. Like, I just couldn't imagine that. Yeah. My mind just couldn't go all that way into that spot. And so I did what, probably many betrayed partners, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever do, is I opened up her computer and got into her email. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, all the information I could ever possibly want was in there. Wow. So I woke up that day engaged, and I went to bed that night a bachelor. She came home. We had a talk. I very sternly told her she was no longer welcome in the house. I mean, I was paying the rent, most of it rather. Kicked her out. I had the unique experience of taking her things and throwing them out the front door, which I wouldn't ever wish on anybody. Yeah. But at the time, it was kind of satisfying after what I had learned that day. So anyway, that one ended with a bang, let me tell you. Yeah. And so there was a period of time there where I had to kind of heal and get over this. But boy, did I emerge from that wiser, smarter, more experienced as a result. And interestingly enough, going back to this thing about preferences, like I just knew I now had a new qualifier for the women I was going to date, which is they needed to be healthier from a certain point of view. And I just knew that right away when I sat across from them. And I went out on 2 dates with one woman. And then I just knew, like, I'm interested in this other person. Mm-hmm. And she was in my social circle. And so I, asked her out, and we went out, and it was just clear from the start that this person was so right for me. And it's been that way ever since. We've been just on the same page 99% of the time. And really what I've learned is that the real thing is effortless in terms of the other person, but is enormously challenging with myself. That's what I'm looking for, and that's what I've got. I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, so the next thing I want to ask you is, you've been married for a few years and been in this relationship, you said 6 years. How do you feel free in that kind of a long-term relationship. And also, I was listening to one of your podcasts. I think you interviewed someone on like alternative ideas to marriage. I thought that was a really fascinating show. And I'm curious, do you have like, is your marriage pretty traditional, or is it more of the alternative type?
It's very traditional, and I'm totally aware of why it is, and we're both on that page in terms of what we want. I have no idea exactly why that's the case, but it's traditional. I mean, like, we're not traditional in terms of like, at least like the sexual part of it. Like, we're monogamous, we're together, we're into that, we're starting a family. Like, that's our goal. We're on that page. Like, we're really matched in that way. It's non-traditional in that we move around a lot. We're not kind of, we traveled the world last year. She actually right now makes more money than I do. I'm not like this classic breadwinner, although I do fairly well. She actually makes more money. So she's actually contributing more to the household than I am. But yet we have a kind of a 5 and 10 year plan where we have a few things in place, things that we want to do that will kind of rearrange our finances so that I'm the primary breadwinner, for very clear reasons that have nothing to do with her being a woman and me being a man.
Right.
That being said, by the way, I should say all of what Vicki Larson talked about in that interview, I wasn't necessarily on board with.
Sure.
So let me just throw that in there too. If people listen to that and you have issues with it, or you have doubts or questions, I agree. I think that the hardest thing to do in this world, by the way, is to see myself and see what it is that I really want, what I'm really about, and go for that in the world. That is a big challenge. So seeing myself is ultimately the kind of Mount Everest of my life. But freedom in the relationship, so I think there are two types of freedom, and I think in the best scenario for myself, both of them are working in harmony with each other. And I always refer to this, and I always ask people to think about, for lack of a better image maybe, the Christian cross. This is not a Christian thing. I'm not necessarily going to start talking about religion here, but I think that cross has a very interesting meaning to it that I've studied. And one is, you've got the horizontal plane and the vertical plane. The horizontal plane is really the world. Like, I want more freedom maybe in terms of finances, or I want more freedom in terms of mobility. I want to travel and see the world. I want more freedom in terms of choice with a sexual partners or a mate. I want this kind of freedom. This is, the horizontal kind, and our world is full of people exploring this, experiencing this, and trying things out. That's great. But that's only half of it. The other part of it is the vertical plane, the kind of spiritual, kind of personal plane where I'm looking for more freedom from, say, internal beliefs that don't serve me, or fears that hold me back, or hesitations or resistances or old ideas. However those appear to me, I can call them whatever I want, but often what I'm looking for is to be free of that thing, that force in me that's often holding me back in some fashion or another. So in terms of women and dating, relationships and marriage, for me, I started horizontal, as you know. I was out picking up girls and trying out all kinds of tactics and dressing up and all this stuff. This is a very horizontal relationship to that. And I took that all the way off that cliff to the point where I was brought face to face with myself and this powerful internal need for acceptance and approval that I had. And that kind of brought the vertical into play. And I needed to accept that other dynamic. I needed to access help from the outside, whether that was, and this could take on any form for people. I know a lot of men who are in men's groups, or who read a lot of self-help books, or in therapy, or involved in spiritual practices that are interesting for one reason or another. For me, it's about meditation. I do a lot of meditation. I have an active, dynamic kind of morning ritual of prayer, gratitude, and meditation. I have outside people that I talk to on a regular basis about my own spiritual life. So I'm actively pursuing that, and I'm actively embarking, or I'm engaged in a process on a daily basis of seeing myself and my resistance, my fears, bringing those out into the world, talking about them with other people, pulling them apart, and finding more freedom within those. And I have to say, like, my relationship, my marriage brings those forward more than anything else. That and maybe my business. But the beauty of a relationship and real intimacy, and I think it's supposed to be this way, is that whatever fears, whatever inhibitions, whatever challenges or shortcomings I have, they're going to show up. I will not be able to run from them in my relationship. And it calls me to grow as a human being, and in my case, a man. Like, it calls me to evolve as a person. And at a certain point, for me, like, I desired that. I stopped wanting an abundance of choice outside, and I wanted one person to form a deep, enduring partnership with. And that's what I have. But on a daily basis, it calls forward in me various shortcomings and old beliefs, fears, a lot of fears that I have to deal with. So it's this kind of blend of the horizontal and the vertical that I'm looking for. I have this relationship on the outside world. She's going to be here in an hour with our lunch. We'll have a wonderful lunch, and then we'll spend the rest of our day together doing X, Y, Z. But on the inside, I'm also dealing with whatever fears and shortcomings come up. I have to let those go. I have to grow beyond them. I have to see them for what they really are. And so freedom for me is both. It's a vertical axis and it's the horizontal, and that's what's exciting to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, so it sounds like you're saying that with a sort of a deeper committed relationship, you're able to bring more of yourself out and kind of be able to become a better person through that deepening of the relationship.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. To break free today, head on over to freedomlovin.com and download our free guide. 7 practical tips to living free in an unfree world.